one of my colleagues in the UK, Alex Trenoweth, who is an astrologer who specializes in adolescents, and she's a school teacher, developed a tool that will really help teenagers and their parents understand themselves using astrology and perhaps make a very big difference to how they succeed in life from then on. So I couldn't wait to talk to her about that. So join us for our Zoom interview with Alex Trenoweth.
Why I wanted to speak to you again was because, this has been such a tough year for most people, most of the world, in so many ways. And we'll talk about some of those ways because, you're a school teacher and there are many, I think, areas of your life where it impacted and where you can share with us, I think some of the relevance of all of this or how people have to move forward is really what we want to talk about. And also, importantly, you did a whole bunch of work, obviously, in lockdown because you're releasing some amazing new reports, astrological reports, that you're going to talk about in a moment as well. For those of you who didn't see you on my show before, you're a school teacher in London. You teach primary school or high school?
I trained to teach high school, but then when I was traveling a lot, I started teaching primary school because, when you teach high school and someone's absent, you just cover internally. So there wasn't a lot of work. So I started teaching primary school just to pick up more work.
Mm-hmm. And so, your teaching must have been severely affected during this period because schools were closed down.
It was, I got to say, it was the saddest day of my life, actually, I think, to walk out the school gates and close it behind me. I think that's it for the foreseeable future.
You're also an astrologer. We've spoken about school teaching, but of course you are a very well-known astrologer and teacher and author. And in many ways, I guess your specialty has been kids. I'm sure you consult with everyone, but, adolescents and younger children, those developmental years are very tough years on anyone, even in the most ordinary of circumstances. I guess from the parents' point of view, you bringing up this teenager, which everyone knows, I need say no more, is a challenge. But as we've all been teenagers before, it's also challenging to be one. And I guess especially now, navigate this world. It's a challenging enough world as it is. And it's kind of become a bit more so in this crazy year. So being a teen ain't easy, and being a parent of a teen ain't easy. So firstly, how would astrology anyway help such a situation, such people?
Astrology has, the advantage of being able to pinpoint the critical years. Mm-hmm. And, critical years are to do with Saturn and Jupiter. So roughly every 3 years for Jupiter, for the growth. I like the challenging transiting aspects because they force us to do something. And so there's always a crisis, but something that you've learned. And then for the Saturn, a different kind of crisis. It's every 7 years. So when you get to the teenage years, you got at 12, you have the Jupiter return. A couple of years later, I use the sextile in the teenage years because it'll make sense, because transiting Jupiter sextile its natal position is happening at the same time as transiting Uranus is sextile its natal position at 13. So that's when things become very, very difficult for parents and teachers. 13 is the year group no teacher wants to teach. Mm. And 13 is also when parents start to realize that the child is defiant. They're obviously growing. Their voices are getting louder. They're getting physically bigger. There's all sorts of things going on associated with puberty. Friendships change. Romantic interests are sparked. All these different kinds of feelings are starting to come to the surface. And then when the Saturn opposition hits, a couple of years later, around 14, 15, is when, that buoyant, troublesome, difficult child becomes quite sullen. And they're getting the first hit of thinking about their future, maybe their mortality, maybe they've had a brush with death or a close call, or someone they love have died.
Saturn is a planet that we associate with a more kind of serious, sometimes even sad approach to that sullen you mentioned. I've never thought of that before, but the archetype of the teenager, the sullen teenager, exactly at that age. And for those who are not aware of the astrology, we really just, when you use these words transits, you're referring just to these planetary cycles that come up at different times. So there's a major Saturn one at 14.
And what's good about using Jupiter and Saturn is that they happen roughly the same years for everybody. There's a pattern to them.
Right.
And what I found with teaching astrologers is that a lot of astrologers don't know really what Jupiter does. They don't understand that, I think the meaning of Jupiter and Saturn come through studying the transits. And, those transits I was talking about, those critical ages, it's like building blocks. And we all understand, when we build with building blocks, how important that foundation is. So if parents and teachers understand what those building blocks are and how they function, they can help that child create a really firm foundation. Because I think when adults fall apart later in life, if they do, you can go back and look at where the foundation was wonky,
Right.
Where
Absolutely.
something wasn't resolved.
Yeah.
And addictions, for example, I think that addictions are created between the Jupiter return and the Saturn opposition, because that's when all the brain development is going on. And children get a thrill. They get that dopamine thrill from taking risks.
Yeah.
It's associated with the Uranus. And so, it creates a cycle that is really hard to break. So when you ask somebody, when did you start smoking? Or when did you start, noticing that you were putting on weight, or you got really self-conscious and started losing weight too quickly, you'll find out that 13 seems to be the magic number.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting because, even without the knowledge of astrology, we know that so much of growing up is about critical timing. The timing is moving fast. And as you said, if certain things are missed at certain times, there are consequences later on in life. So, I always say astrology is the art of perfect timing. If I had to write a sentence to describe what it is, amongst the many things it is, I think in the most practical terms, it boils down to that. People should see astrologers to know when things should be done or best to be done, best to gain the advantage. And I'm fascinated what you say about Jupiter because, to us astrologers, Jupiter is the good guy planet. We're talking about Saturn being all about sullen teenagers, and Jupiter is meant to be the more optimistic, opportunity-based planet. And as you said, astrologers often don't know quite what to do with it, which I think resembles a lot of our cultures, that we can talk about terrible crises, but we don't really know how to talk about opportunities so well.
Yeah, and just to say, people talk, the lingo on Astro Twitter and stuff like that about the Saturn return at around the age of 29, how it's supposed to be so miserable. Well, if you understand from an early age how your Saturn works, or your parents help you understand, you're gonna graduate with your Saturn.
Absolutely.
It could be something that's really brings a feeling of accomplishment.
Some of that kind of confusion might even plague young people because they're trying to make sense of the world. And we present to them this sanitized, idealized version of the world. Because for me, the biggest issue I have with kids at school is they get this feedback from their parents, from the generation above them, that somehow, by the age of 18, they're supposed to know exactly what they must now do with the rest of their lives. And
I'm not even sure what I want to do the rest of my life.
What are they supposed to base that on? They're trying to figure out who they are and what they want, and they haven't yet been free to. They're living under parents and teachers.
I mean, Saturn can certainly, it is about lessons, but, when children complain to me, or when I was teaching high school and they start their examinations, they complain to me, I don't want to take an exam. It's like, but you're going to be examined in some way or another for the rest of your life. You go to the doctor, you go to the dentist, you go to the bank, you take your driving license. Examinations are a part of your life. And if you can understand, if you study, if you know where your weaknesses are, you can fix them up. Always Saturn wants to be put to work, always working on those weak spots, always trying to make them stronger and build them so that, they can take whatever life is going to throw at you, because that's what it's going to happen. That's what Saturn is.
And it's important, I think, for us to be honest with kids and help them understand that, it will sometimes be difficult, or it's all right not to know who you are or what you're going to do. So yes. I know, what you have been working on through your summer of lockdown has been this report, this astrological report for adolescents and their parents. And an astrological report, for those who don't know, is where you can hand over your precious birth details, like your date and place and time of birth, and you get what is generally a computer-generated report, usually in immense detail, which is amazing, about who you are or whatever. But what I'm fascinated by is this report is especially for young parents, young people and their parents.
Just let me say, Rod, it's not just over lockdown I've been working on this. I've been working on this since UAC,
Really,
2.5 years ago. UAC is the United Astrology Conference that Rod and I last saw each other in person. So 2.5 years, and it's the combination of every single aspect, so every planet and every aspect, and I just stuck to the Ptolemaic aspects and then to the angles as well. But my specialism is working with young people, so I brought my skills of making the language accessible as well. So it's not loaded with astrology jargon or inaccessible vocabulary. It's designed for young people to read it, and also it's very careful with wording. Making it clear that I'm not dictating someone's future. I'm not doing that at all. I'm helping them understand themselves better, and hopefully making them curious about astrology, so they can take that knowledge and they can learn more from it. They'll pick up a book or something else and they can learn from it, and then maybe have an interest in astrology that will not only help themselves, but maybe they can help other people too.
Yeah. How does it compare for them actually going to consult a real live astrologer as opposed to getting a report off your website?
That's a really good question. And if you're an astrologer and you're listening to me, listen to me carefully. Never, ever have an unsupervised child in your office, ever. It goes against child protection guidelines across the world. You are in a vulnerable position. And if you think I'm being, paranoid, just look at what happened to Prince Andrew. Yeah. He was with an unsupervised, underage girl, and now look at him. He's lost everything. So, don't put yourself in that position. So, having said that, I understand that astrology is a powerful tool. And I told you the story about my student who ended up in jail last time we interviewed, and and how guilty I felt, and how I felt that, okay, I've been banned from using astrology at school, but I can still do something. And I call it playing catcher in the rye. If there's a child that's in trouble, who am I not to intervene? If I have these skills, who am I just to stand there and say, "Who grow out of it," and do nothing about it? I can get in there. So the report. Nothing will replace a live consultation with an astrologer, Zoom or in person if you're over 18. But, these reports are designed to, offer something rather than nothing.
What you're saying, you fill this critical gap, that it's not just, okay, well, since you can't see an astrologer, but it's very valuable information they can get at a very critical time. We were talking about timing earlier. And I think it's actually brilliant now that you said that, since they can't really consult astrologers at that young age, they can really access the important, useful, and relatable info. If it's about teenagers, then they can relate it. Should they look at a report with their parents, or is it something more private?
I've said this in the introduction, it's meant to be for the parent and child to get to know each other. And the parent can also run the report too, because people are very uncomfortable talking about their adolescence.
Yeah.
People get embarrassed. And what I found from my research is that people tend to remember themselves in very negative terms. When you ask somebody to describe yourself at 13 in 3 words or phrases, people blush, they fidget, they don't want to think about it. Whereas if you ask a 13-year-old child, what's it like to be 13? They're going to tell you how joyful it is, how much they feel the world is opening up to them. So, it's designed, and I think parents can be very hard on teenagers too, because they don't remember, or they overdo the Saturn, and they want to, it's a natural parent's instinct to protect their child. But it's also part of growing up, the separation issue that's going on. A child is going to grow away from its parent. And, it doesn't have to be this crisis. It will be something of a crisis, because this separation is painful. But if you can accept it, kind of like accepting death, the inevitable. You know, once you reach that stage of accepting that this is going to happen, and this is a stage that is necessary so you can move into your own home, raise a family if that's what you want, and work in your career separate from, you know, having a parent hovering over you all the time, or a teacher hovering over you.
I think that is quite empowering. But I never thought of it, but I really like the idea of this interaction between parent and child, especially it creates this space for a conversation that probably could never have happened. And it lets them both be a little bit safer, because the report is this intermediary that's, you know, so they can discuss, well, do you agree with that? Or do you think that does describe you well? Or were you like that when you were my age? Those questions can come up in a very safe space where the child isn't feeling accused of something, or, you know, watched and spied upon by parents, all those things they do go through at that age. I think that's quite empowering in terms of their relationship as well. What about the difficult stuff? So there is a lot of difficult stuff about being a teen. And also, there's also that aspect of teenagehood, maybe sometimes related to puberty, maybe a little bit later when they start becoming interested in relationships, where they feel embarrassed about things they would never speak in front of their parents about at all, be it their sexuality or anything really. With a kid, you just never know. Does the report address those kind of issues at all? Things that a teen might feel a little bit personal about?
Well, I do cover Mars and Venus, not in great depth, because I wanted, I wanted to peak the conversation. You know, I didn't want to, give it all away. I wanted, there to be, because think about how awful it would be if you're, if you're 13, you're talking to your parents, and it's just hard to discuss your sexuality.
Yeah.
With your parents. And one of the questions that came up, because we did a lot of preliminary reports with parents and teenagers, and one of the parents asked the question, my son thinks he's gay. And I had to say, well, astrology can't tell, and that's not what's important anyway. What's important is that you love somebody. And so those kind of questions come up, but it's the reports are designed to bring a conversation around if that's what the child wants. Now, a child will talk about their sexuality to the person that they choose, and maybe that person won't be the parent, but that's natural, because you got to live with your parents, right?
Yeah, exactly.
and so you can talk to a trusted teacher or your friends. Now, what we try to do in schools is we try to bring information to children about sex. Through sex education, but children getting information from other children is something that we don't want to encourage, because children don't know everything, and don't have the experience and the emotional, especially the emotional experience to deal with these things. But at 13, when that the sextiles are going on, is when the child is stops listening to parents and teachers and starts listening more to their friends. So, I mean, that's, a really critical age to remember. So we want to have it all before that age. We don't want to wait till they're 14 or 15. We want to get it, when they're the younger adolescent. And then you got to be careful about, you don't want to give them ideas either, that will put them in danger. You want them to have a healthy sexual relationship, a safe sexual relationship, but you don't want to have them take crazy risks, but they do.
What about a parent who is perhaps having difficulty with a child, or maybe not, but can a parent use the report on their own to understand the child, maybe deal with issues they're having at home?
I think so. I mean, ideally, I'd rather the parent and the child work together, because this is what I do as an astrologer. If a parent comes to me, because nobody comes to an astrologer if everything's perfect, right? They only come to us if they're having problems, which is something else to bear in mind too. If you're working, as an astrologer, we deal with so many different, really difficult situations, and we have to know what to do.
Yeah.
As a teacher, if a child comes to me and discloses something to me, I can't just say, I promise not to say anything. Mm-hmm. I have to act on what I've been told. And, so this, the report gives something that will allow the parent maybe to understand the child's motivations more, especially when I'm looking at their Saturn compared to the child's Jupiter, or Saturn to their Saturn, or whatever they can see. Because as I said, the parent's natural instinct is to protect their child. Well, they don't realize it, but they might be clipping that child's wings at the same time.
Yeah.
And, so I think the language that I've used will help parents understand those boundaries, and, when to let a child, a little bit more off the lead, and when to pull them back in. And as I said, the separation is inevitable, and
Sure.
maybe the parent needs to process that. And by looking through the report, I think they can get an idea of when these stages are going to happen.
That's great. So I'll turn my question around and maybe make it a more difficult question. What if there's a teenager watching this conversation right now who's thinking, oh, that's amazing. I really need to get my hands on that. I'm having either difficulty with my folks, or I don't know how to talk to them about X, Y, Z, or whatever it may be. But they're afraid even to ask their parents for an astrology report. They don't have their own credit card. What is a kid going to do who realizes astrology can help me, but my parents don't understand that?
Yeah, there's going to be, astrology is one of those fields where it has a bit of a bad reputation at times, where people think we're throwing rattlesnakes around or something, or talking to the devil or whatever. And, we're just looking at the cycles of the planets, which are happening, whether or not you believe in it, they do actually happen. And, so there's some, I feel bad, for those kinds of situations where a child doesn't know where to go to for information.
Yeah.
But, a lot of information is freely available on the internet. So if they can't access my reports, they can go to other astrology sites and get some insight. But, ideally, for a lot of different reasons, my report is written for them. So,
well, I have hope in the fact that, as an astrologer, I know that many parents have brought their kids up with enough of an open mind to say, well, if you're interested in that, you must explore that and see where it goes, which is great to see. But as you say, ideally, they're going to be able to do this together. So how do they get hold of the report? Can they go to your website?
Eventually. Now, the official launch isn't until tomorrow, and then it's going to take a couple of days to install the proper software onto my website. But they can go to ESOTech, and they'll be available from tomorrow. As I said, we've done quite a few test runs, and I think people are very pleased, especially the parents and teenagers that we asked about the reports. So yeah, they'll be available soon.
Great. And there, many astrologers and amateur astrologers listening who would probably be interested in actually acquiring the report generating software themselves. I think, sometimes astrologers can think about an astrological report and think, well, I don't need that because I can do astrology myself. And we forget, we cover the entire range of human experience. You can't know everything about everything or specialize in everything. For example, you're an acknowledged expert on adolescence and developmental stages in our field. Not every astrologer is going to be an expert on that. And I think it's a great way for astrologers actually to make available information to each other on addressing certain specialties.
When I was writing this report, I did an awful lot of whinging, about so much work. And I learned so much, by just making myself go through and interpret these things, going back, looking at the language. I learned so much myself. I think that, it unlocked some creativity in me too. So, even though, I think I've been at it nearly 30 years, I learned a tremendous amount.
Yeah. Important thing, I think, for people to understand is that such astrology reports are actually written by astrologers. So it is actual expert information that you're accessing, that, the ordinary lay folk who reading the reports need to know these are real astrologers behind them, and other astrologers need to understand that it's one of the ways that we share information with each other, so that because we can't specialize in everything. And it's a very, very, it's a very powerful and detailed report. It's amazing what computers are available or are capable of. You know what? I'm just going to use this opportunity to quickly say to those watching, looking for astrological reports online, that when you find free ones, be a little suspicious And especially those free ones who will tell you that you've got some special something coming up in 54 days' time. There's plenty of those. We astrologers have to deal with victims of that little scam all the time. So rather, put your rands or dollars or pounds or euros down and spend a little money for real quality from a real astrologer. Alex, you are a teacher for the future and of the future. I think you are showing parents and children new ways to understand each other. Mostly, I like the fact that you're going to be exposing many more young people to astrology and the value of astrology, and many more parents too. So it's been great talking to you and seeing you
Really
again.
good talking to you.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's been
Thank
lovely.
you, Rob.